Hey guys, it's Morgan, and today I'm going to be doing my September wrap-up. I read 8 books in September, but I only have 5 physical copies, so I'll just have to show you a picture of the ones that I don't have. I already forgot the order I read these in. Okay, so the first book I read in September is The Rise of the Elgin by Richard Paul Evans. This is the second Michael Bay book. This series follows a group of kids who have electric powers. On the day they were born, this company came out with a new X-ray, and when they used it, a bunch of babies died, like newborns, and a bunch of them lived, but I think some of them still died. Some of them either died right away, and some of them died a little bit later of like cancer. So there was 17 that are still alive, and it's about this group of these electric children. And in the first book, they find out that there's this guy named Hatch, and he wants to kind of have all of these kids under his control. He wants the power. And so Michael and one other kid, Taylor, are the only 2 left that he hasn't found, and so he's been searching for them. And he ends up finding them, and his mother gets kidnapped, and so the whole first book is about him trying to rescue his mother with his new friend Taylor, and they find out that they both have these kind of powers, and it's really good. There's 7 books in this series. I've only ever read 3, and this is the second time I've read this one. I actually listened to it on audio, but I really like this series. I think I gave it, 4 stars. So yeah, this is great. The second book I read in September, I read it for book club. It's called The Radium Girls by Kate Moore, and it's all about, I wish it would clear. It's all about, there it goes. The Radium Girls. So it kind of starts out, pretty sure it's a nonfiction. But it kind of starts out with the history of radium, 1901, when it was kind of first really discovered. I feel like there's a hair tickling me. And then it kind of jumps to the war and how they needed all these girls to paint the dials and the compasses for the airplanes because they glowed. And it's kind of a long time before any of them really start showing symptoms of the radium poisoning. They were all told that it's perfectly safe, it'll help their health. Like back then it was this big cure-all, and they do this thing called lip pointing. Only in America though. In other countries they use like glass, like kind of a stylus kind of thing, or a special kind of brush. They use the girls in America use camel, I think it was camel hair brushes, and they're very fine, and they would paint the numbers on like the watch faces and stuff, and they'd stick it in their mouth to point the tip of the brush. And so they were ingesting radium, and it was all over their body and all over their clothes, and some of them were wearing their good party dresses to work so that they would glow when they go out, and some of the girls would like paint their teeth so they'd glow on their dates, and it was this big thing. And if you worked at the radium factory, you got paid really well, and so it was mostly these teenage girls. I think some of the younger ones were 13, and it was like 5 years before any of them really started showing symptoms. And so it goes through like the whole, a bunch of them died, and a bunch of them lived like a long life. Like one woman lived to be in her 50s, but she had to have her left arm amputated when she was in her early 20s, which ended up saving her life, but she lived her life with only one arm. And one woman was permanently handicapped. Her legs were permanently crossed, so she could never walk, and it was like 30 or 40 years that she lived like this. And so there's all these long-term effects on the women who survived, and the whole legal process of them trying to sue these company, and it was crazy. Like, I never really knew much about the Radiant Girls, and it was very enlightening. It was really good. I gave it 4 stars. The next book I also don't have. I read it for book club. Oh, I read Radiant Girls for book club, and I also read this next one for book club. It's called The Maid of Fairborn Hall by Julie Klassen. And I really liked this book. I didn't really expect to like it. I gave it 4 stars. But it's about this woman in kind of Victorian London times, and she lives with her mother and her younger sister and brother, and they're a very wealthy family. And her father was a pastor, and he had died. And her mother remarried this man who she thought loved her, but he really didn't, and he was only after her money. But it turns out all of the money that is going to be inherited by, I can't remember her name, Catherine or something like that, from her great aunt. And so he brings his nephew to come live with them and tries to get him to marry her. And she really doesn't like him, and she doesn't want to marry him. She kind of feels like she doesn't want to get married for her money, and nobody really knows about it. She wants to marry for love, because back then, if you're a woman and you get married, everything you have is now your husband's. He owns everything, so the money would be her husband's. And so she really doesn't want to marry anybody until she has the money. But it goes so far as her stepfather suggesting that his nephew force himself on her to force her to marry him, because back then that was like a big no-no, you know, don't be alone in a room with a man unless it's your father or your brother kind of thing. And so she ends up running away and posing as a maid, and she ends up in Fairborn Hall, where the man that had loved her and asked her to marry him, she rejected him, and he's one of the brothers that lives in Fairborn Hall. And so she's trying to keep up this disguise for 3 months until her birthday so that she can get the money. And it was a really good book. I really liked it. The next book I read was The Hazelwood by Melissa Albert. I gave this book 4 stars. This is a very interesting book. It's a lot about fairy tales. And I don't really know how to explain it. It follows a 17-year-old girl named Alice, and her grandmother wrote this book of fairy tales that are very dark and don't really have a moral, and it's just like this real kind of creepy book, and her mother won't let her read it, and it's all very secret, and they've been on the run her whole life, moving from place to place multiple times a year, and her mother ends up vanishing, which I feel like I've read a couple of those books this month, or this year. Anyway, her mom disappears, and she is trying to figure out where her mom went, and so she ends up going to this kid in her class, Ellery Finch, because he knows all about this book her grandmother wrote, and it's this whole mystery of trying to figure out what these stories are, because she's never heard them, and where her mother is, and it was really good, and I'm really excited for the sequel. Yeah, it was great. The next book I read in September was Dangerous Lies by Becca Fitzpatrick. I know a lot of people didn't like this book because of the main character and her attitude towards life and all this stuff, but wow, there's a sticker in here. But I kind of sympathize with her. The way she was raised wasn't the greatest. Basically, it follows this girl. Her name is Estella, but she goes into witness protection, and so they have to change her name to Stella because Estella is a very unique name. And so her mother is a drug addict, and she ends up witnessing a murder. Or she doesn't witness the murder, but she witnesses the aftermath, and it's her mother's drug dealer. And so she goes into witness protection, and her mother goes to rehab, and she ends up in this little tiny town in, I don't even know where, like Kansas or something. Somewhere farmy. Which is saying something because I kind of live in a farm area, but I don't want to say really anything about this because it's got a lot of twists and turns in it, and I actually really liked it. I didn't mind the main character's attitude so much. She changed a lot by the end, and some people are like, too little too late, but I mean, you have to take into account the way she was raised and what she's been through in her life, and yeah, so I really liked it. There's some romance in there, and yeah, really good. I think I gave it 4 stars. Yes, I did. The next book I no longer own because I really didn't like it very much. I did give it 3 stars. I probably might read the next book, The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. I got it in an Owl Crate box, and I ended up reading it with a group of people, and I really didn't like it very much. It's about fairies, and the main character is a human, lives in, I don't even know what it's called, Fairyland. But there's, I don't even want to explain this book. Some romance in there, there's murder, mystery, lots of royal peoples. She ends up becoming a spy for one of the princes. There's 3 princes and 2 princesses, and I can't even tell you which one is cruel because they kind of all are cruel, and yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I gave it 3 stars. I got rid of it as soon as I finished it. I actually sent it to somebody else who wanted to read it, so there's that. I just want to say one thing, though. I discovered a thing called Caravan Clubs, I think is what it's called, and it's basically an online, it's a website where you can go to and you can find book groups or buddies to read books with, and you can have discussions, and you can set out a schedule, and I really like it. It's one of the main reasons I've read so many books recently. I guess only one of these books that I read in September was with Caravan, but I ended up reading The Cruel Prince in like a week. I listened to it on audio mostly, but yeah, it's really great. I'll leave a link below in case you guys are interested in it. I'm not sponsored or anything, but it saved my life. Like, all but one of the books I've read in October has been with a group on Caravan, and it's the reason I came out of my slump, I think. But yeah, it's really great, and you can connect with people all over the world and talk about books, so obviously I love it. But yeah. Anyway, the next book I read in September was Battle of the Ampere, the 3rd Michael Vey book by Richard Paul Evans. So again, I don't want to say much about this because it'd spoil, but this is the 3rd book in this Michael Vey series out of 7. And yeah, it's great. I really love this series. I gave this book 4 stars. I really like it. One thing I do like about it, the main character, Michael, has Tourette's syndrome, which is correctly portrayed because in psychology, I had to do a research project on a mental illness, and I had to compare it with a book or a movie in culture, and kind of make an argument about whether it was a correct portrayal of the mental illness or not. And I can't remember, I did it on a movie that was actually kind of, it was a depressing movie, but it was kind of funny at the same time. And Hollywood portrays Tourette syndrome as people cussing a lot, compulsively, they can't help it. That's very inaccurate. It's mostly like tics and twitches and like noises. It's not a specific words. And it is portrayed correctly in this series, and you know, like he gets more tics when he's anxious or nervous or scared or super excited, and I feel like it adds to the story, the main character having a major flaw like that, and he still is a great leader of this group, and yeah, I really like it. It's great. Then the last book I read in September is The City of Ember by Janie, something like that, Duprow. I've read this book before. I've read the whole series. My grandma's read it, my brother's read it, my mom's read it, and this is also the book I picked this year for book club, which I already read it, but it's not for, we're gonna discuss it in November. But it's a middle grade series, and it follows a girl, can't remember what her name is. What is her name? Lena and her friend Dune, and they live in Ember, and it's an underground city. It was built by the builders, And so it's been over 200 years, like 250 years or something, since they've been down here. So nobody knows that there's anything different from Ember, and it's like this, it's just a little city, and they're running out of food, and they're running out of light bulbs, and they're running out of like clothes, and their electricity keeps shutting down, but nobody knows how electricity works, and so they have people that work in the generator, but they don't really know how it works, and so it's a lot of guessing. And when you turn 12, you get your job. So basically how you get your job is the mayor comes to your class and you draw a job out of a hat. So they write down the most needed jobs that have to be filled, and you draw it out of a hat. That's your job for 3 years as like a probationary period, and then if it fits, you stay, and if it doesn't, they give you something else. And Lena always wanted to be a messenger, and she ends up getting Pipeworks job, and Dune always wanted to work near the generator, and he ends up getting the messenger job, so they end up switching jobs. And Lena ends up finding kind of like this box full of mystery, and they're trying to figure out how to save Ember. Like, Dune really wants to figure out how the generator works so that he can keep it from shutting down, because they have blackouts for minutes at a time, and it's pitch black because they're underground, and it's just a fun adventure story. I liked it. It was a quick read. But yeah. So, those are the 8 books I read in September, and I'm excited to read more books this month. I'm already at 6 books, and it's October 14th, and I have to finish 2 more books this week for caravan groups. So yeah, I will hit 8, for sure. I'll probably hit more than that, but yeah, I'm super excited. So, yay! Oh, my Goodreads reading challenge was originally 50, but I had to change it because I didn't read enough, and I changed it to 25, and I'm at 23, so I will hit my goal this month. I might make it to 50, who knows. I'd have to read like 10 books a month for the rest of the year, but I would make it. We'll see. But yeah, so that's my September wrap-up. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!